Before I start Benjamin's back half, I feel I haven't mentioned this in a while, but I do want to remind people that Techno-Poverty is a work of parody. That's not to say we're being completely facetious, insincere, and straight up lying to you or joking about everything, but we really are beings from a parallel dimension, on the run from the big wigs. It very much is a place similar to your very own dimension in 99.5% of the ways, let's say.
Yeah.
That 0.5%, oh man, that's a very dangerous margin between just complete post apocalyptic dystopia and what we have now, if you think what we have now is bad. But I digress. Let's get to Walter Benjamin's The Work of Art, The Age of Mechanical Reproduction. I'm going to start on part 5. We read the first 4 parts last time. Works of art are received and valued on different planes. Two polar types stand out. With one, the accent is on the cult value, with the other on the exhibition value of the work. Artistic production begins with ceremonial objects destined to serve in a cult. One may assume that what mattered was their existence, not their being on view. The elk portrayed by the man of the Stone Age on the walls of his cave was an instrument of magic. He did expose it to his fellow men, but in the main it was meant for the spirits. Today, the cult value would seem to demand the work of art remain hidden. Certain statues of gods are accessible only to the priest in the cella. Certain Madonnas remain covered nearly all year round. Certain sculptures on medieval cathedral are invisible to the spectator on ground level. With the emancipation of various art practices from ritual go increasing opportunities for the exhibition of their products. It is easier to exhibit a portrait bust that can be sent here and there than to exhibit the statue of a divinity that has its fixed place in the interior of a temple. The same holds for the painting as against the mosaic or fresco that preceded it. And even though the public presentability of a mass originally may have been just as great as that of a symphony, the latter originated at the moment when the public presentability promised to surpass that of the mass. With the different methods of technical reproduction of a work of art, its fitness for exhibition increased to such an extent that the quantitative shift between its two poles turned into a qualitative transformation of its nature. This is comparable to the situation of the work of art in prehistoric times, when, by the absolute emphasis on its cult value, it was, first and foremost, an instrument of magic. Only later did it come to be recognized as a work of art. In the same way today, by the absolute emphasis on its exhibition value, the work of art becomes a creation with an entirely new function, among which the one we are conscious of, the artistic function, later may be recognized as incidental. This much is certain. Today, photography and the film are most serviceable exemplifications of this new function. So, a photograph or a film can be reprinted, reused instantly. This is kind of what he's getting at. You know, the cult ritual was the making of the cave painting as a great signifier. You know, the absolute need or importance was that it was signifying something. It wasn't, you know, so much that there was an author that or an individual to be lauded for painting the thing. It's that the thing needed to be painted to communicate an idea. Over time, it becomes more like, look, I did a painting. I'm the one. You shift the focus from, you know, religious object to exhibition object. There's a creator involved. Kind of going from communism to individualism in a way, an individuation of the artistic process as the means of technology permit us to recreate it faster. In photography, exhibition value begins to displace the cult value all along the line, but cult value does not give way without resistance. It retires into an ultimate retrenchment, the human countenance. This is why people say, you know, new movies have no soul. If they're being made quick and cheap and there's just no cult value to it, it's just the thing being made because a movie needs to be made to fill a slot on Netflix. Sure, it's just all shot flat digitally, just given a quick post-grade color with, you know, a bit of contrast, but, you know, not as considered. You get something like The Gray Man, and who's watching The Gray Man? The movie's called The Gray Man. It is for gray men, just in the background. Jacob, did you ever watch The Gray Man? Do you remember what that one is?
No, not at all.
Okay, it was a Russo Bros like Ryan Reynolds, Chris Evans action blockbuster from I want to say 2 years ago. Uh,
Ooh, yeah, no, completely avoided that one, I guess.
but this kind of tendency towards like human continence and kind of like because you're losing the religious side of it, you're frustrating someone. This is where you can start getting like the resentment culture or like the reactionaries who are mad when like woke stuff's in their Star Wars, even though Star Wars has had the same politics since 1977.
Yeah, God, it's so dumb.
Josh Farman remembers one thing that happened in it. That's more than I can. Josh, I watched Mountainhead. I saw your post about Mountainhead. I I can't remember how Mountainhead ends. Like I remember they generally like agree to do the guy in and then that doesn't happen. Spoilers for those of you who haven't watched Mountainhead. I can't imagine there's many of you who like want to watch it and are still
Yeah,
withholding.
it's all right.
I don't remember the ending like after I know the general like they let him out of the hot box and the deals. What I'm saying is it didn't stick, and I'm just thinking of that in this whole age of just like lost power within the moving image because of the cynicism. It's the only movie that legit shook my wife. I did talk about this with Jacob. The thing I liked about Mountainhead is the way it filmed people on phones in conversation with each other, like without having to resort to straight up like little floating text graphics or comic book esque bubbles. It's just dudes reading their phone and kind of relaying casually to each other what they're saying. That I don't know, something about that felt real and cool. In the moment of the movie. I didn't like the whole composite thing put together, but I liked the way phones were shot and used within the frame. I think too many directors, I don't know, I think there's too many movies that avoid cell phones or try to make them too cool and quirky, and there still hasn't been anything that's really captured them in the now in quite a way that almost did. Okay, let's get back to the human countenance, because I got off path there. It is no accident that the portrait was the focal point of early photography. The cult of remembrance of loved ones, absent or dead, offers a last refuge for the cult of value of the picture. For the last time, the aura emanates from the early photographs in the fleeting expression of a human face. This is what constitutes their melancholy, or incomparable beauty. But as man withdraws from the photographic image, the exhibition value for the first time shows its superiority to the ritual value. To have pinpointed this new stage constitutes the incomparable significance of Atget, who around 1900 took photographs of deserted Paris streets. It has quite justly been said of him that he photographed them like scenes of a crime. The scene of a crime, too, is deserted. It is photographed for the purpose of establishing evidence. With a get, photographs become standard evidence for historical occurrences and acquire a hidden political significance. They demand a specific kind of approach. Free-floating contemplation is not appropriate to them. They stir the viewer. He feels challenged by them in a new way. At the same time, picture magazines begin to put up signposts for him. Right ones or wrong ones, no matter. For the first time, captions have become obligatory, and it is clear that they have an altogether different character than the title of a painting. The directives which the captions give to those looking at pictures in illustrated magazines soon become even more explicit and more imperative in the film, where the meaning of each single picture appears to be prescribed by the sequence of all preceding ones. Yeah, so there's more sense of narrative and direction you can start prescribing a photograph in a magazine, and these quick collages and montages of images and sequences to make new meanings that are fake. Chapter 7. The 19th century dispute as to the artistic value of painting versus photography today seems devious and confused. This does not diminish its importance, however. If anything, it underlines it. The dispute was in fact the symptom of a historical transformation, the universal impact of which was not realized by either of the rivals. When the age of mechanical reproduction separated art from its basis in cult, the semblance of its autonomy disappeared forever. The resulting change in the function of art transcended the perspective of the century. For a long time, it even escaped that of the 20th century, which experienced the development of the film. Earlier, much futile thought had been devoted to the question of whether photography is an art. The primary question, whether the very invention of photography had not transformed the entire nature of art, was not raised. Soon the film theoreticians asked all the same ill-considered questions with regard to the film, but the difficulties which photography caused traditional aesthetics were mere child's play as compared to those raised by the film. Whence the insensitive and forced character of early theories of the film, Abel Gance, for instance, compares the film with hieroglyphs. Here, by a remarkable regression, we have come back to the level of expression of the Egyptians. Pictorial language has not yet matured because our eyes have not yet adjusted to it. There is, as yet, insufficient respect for, insufficient cult of, what expresses it. Or, in the words of Severin Mars, what art has been granted a dream, more poetical and more real art at the same time. Approached in this fashion, the film might represent an incomparable means of expression. Only the most high-minded persons, in the most perfect and mysterious moments of their lives, should be allowed to enter its ambience. Alexander Arnault concludes his fantasy about the silent film with the question, do not all the bold descriptions we've given amount to the definition of prayer? It is instructive to note how their desire to class the film among the arts forces these theoreticians to read ritual elements into it, with a striking lack of discretion. Yet when those speculations were published, films like L'Opinion Publique and The Gold Rush had already appeared. This, however, did not keep Abel Gance from adducting hieroglyphs for purposes of comparison, nor Severin Mars from speaking of the film as one might speak of paintings by Fray Angelico. Characteristically, even today, ultra-reactionary authors give the film a similar contextual significance. Okay, I'm going to read that again. Characteristically, even today, ultra-reactionary authors give the film a similar contextual significance, if not an outright sacred one, then at least a supernatural one. Commenting on Max Reinhardt's film version of A Midsummer Night's Dream, Werfel states that undoubtedly it was the sterile copying of the exterior world with its streets, interiors, railroad stations, restaurants, motorcars, and beaches which until now had obstructed the elevation of the film into the realm of art. The film has not yet realized its true meaning, its real possibilities. These consist in its unique faculty to express by natural means and with incomparable persuasiveness all that is fairy-like, marvelous, and supernatural. Wow, I'd like to look up some of these guys and see if they stuck around long enough to see just like Disney movies or even 60s and 70s fantasy movies, the spaghetti westerns, just running wild with the fairy tale aspects that film was only scratching upon in the early 1900s. I mean, you still had German Expressionism, you still had Nosferatu, Dr. Caligari. They saw Metropolis, definitely, but you know, I'm curious how someone who's considering these things in 1908 is going to react to Star Wars. I mean, that thing worked like gangbusters and made so much money because it, blew people's minds. 8. The artistic performance of a stage actor is definitely presented to the public by the actor in person. That of the screen actor, however, is presented by a camera, with a twofold consequence. The camera that presents the performance of the film actor to the public need not respect the performance as an integral whole. Guided by the cameraman, the camera continually changes its position with respect to the performance. The sequence of positional views which the editor composes from the material supplied to him constitutes the completed film. It comprises certain factors of movement which are in reality those of the camera, not to mention special camera angles, close-ups, etc. Hence, the performance of the actor is subjected to a series of optical tests. This is the first consequence of the fact that the actor's performance is presented by a means of the camera. Also, the film actor lacks the opportunity of the stage actor to adjust to the audience during his performance, since he does not present his performance to the audience in person. This permits the audience to take the position of a critic, without experiencing any personal contact with the actor. The audience's identification with the actor is really an identification with the camera. Consequently, the audience takes the position of the camera. Its approach is that of testing. This is not the approach to which cult values may be exposed. This is something I think more people need to consider when slamming actors for being in bad movies, is the fundamental trust an actor is investing in everyone else in the crew of a film, as opposed to the actor being on a stage and having to really know everything in the moment and have feedback and bounce back with an audience. You can't read the room. You don't know how the edit's going to go. If you're an actor, you may not even know exactly what the camera's doing, and you just have to trust that the director and the cinematographer know what they're doing, and that the editor's going to find the right way to cut what you're trying to do, and just that everything's going to come together. There's a lot of trust an actor has to put into the camera in ways that make me... when I see a bad movie, I go a bit easier on the actors than I do, the editors, the writers, the directors, the DP. I don't know, Jacob, did you ever have an experience like that? Did you feel like maybe you were harsher on actors and had some sort of similar realization, or just anything you feel you've noticed in just like what you think acting is, or what you've observed on set versus what you thought as a kid, or when you were like less aware of how the meat gets made?
Yeah, man, it was, acting, like, you really do, when you are making a film and being a part of a smaller part, you really start to see how everything comes together, and like acting is a big part of the final presentation, but it's such a small part of like when things happen that it is like, I think I'm with you. It's like I usually will go towards like people not getting like good enough direction or something else that is like giving the actors like, unless the actor is just like not having a good emotion, but it's,
Yeah.
acting is very hard.
And
I've done very small roles and it sucks.
Yeah, and this does not mean all bad movies aren't a case of bad act. There's still bad acting can happen. Bad acting goes down in good movies. Good acting goes down in bad movies. Actors can be bad, is what I'm saying. I'm not trying to excuse all bad acting through this. I'm just saying, like, I think in the general perception of the public process of how a movie gets made, there's a lot of judgment placed on actors that maybe should be placed elsewhere as far as what's really causing a movie to be bad.
Yeah.
All right, chapter 9.
Definitely agree. Stupid demon.
For the film, what matters primarily is that the actor represents himself to the public before the camera, rather than representing someone else. One of the first to sense the actor's metamorphosis by this form of testing was Pirandello. Through his remarks on the subject in his novel Sigira were limited to the negative aspects of the question and the silent film only, this hardly impairs their validity. For in this respect, the sound film did not change anything essential. What matters is that the part is acted not for an audience, but for a mechanical contrivance. In the case of the sound film, for two of them. The film actor, wrote Pirandello, feels as if in exile. Exiled not only from the stage, but also from himself. With a vague sense of discomfort, he feels inexplicable emptiness. His body loses its corporeality. It evaporates. It is deprived of reality, life, voice, and the noises caused by his moving about, in order to be changed into a mute image, flickering in an instant on the screen, then vanishing into silence. Make sure I got the right page here, because they're kind of thin. Yep. The projector will play with his shadow before the public, and he himself must be content to play before the camera. This situation might also be characterized as follows. For the first time, and this is the effect of the film, man has to operate with his whole living person, yet foregoing its aura. For aura is tied to its presence. There can be no replica of it. The aura which, on the stage, emanates from Macbeth, cannot be separated from the spectators from that of the actor. However, the singularity of the shot in the studio is that the camera is substituted for the public. Consequently, the aura that envelops the actor vanishes, and with it, the aura of the figure he portrays. It is not surprising that it should be a dramatist such as Pirandello who is characterizing in the film, inadvertently touching on the very crisis in which we see the theater. Any thorough study proves that there is indeed no greater contrast than that of the stage play to a work of art that is completely subject to, or, like the film, founded in, mechanical reproduction. Experts have long recognized that in film, the greatest effects are almost always obtained by acting as little as possible. In 1932, Rudolf Arnheim saw the latest trend in treating the actor as a stage prop chosen for its characteristics and inserted at the proper place. So the actor in a film is becoming just a tool for the camera. When you think of aura, because I would even argue in some sense, aura went from just the performance itself or the actor itself to the overall concept of the movie. You know, we now say like the movie has aura. It's not just the one image. It takes a larger composition of images. It takes compounding of smaller slices of things. Like the actor alone is a tool. If the tool's in service of a movie that's serving a good ideological purpose, it's generating aura. But it's harder to generate that level of aura because there's more things that have to come together in a movie than, you know, a play. But also Benjamin is getting at that, you know, aura is a moment in time, and essentially would probably disagree with film generating aura. It's just a thing to rewatch, maybe a salve or a substitute for an actual ritual. But hey, film's our church.
Yeah.
It is not surprising that it should be a drama. Oh wait, I already picked that up, didn't I?
And movies are parables, or can be.
With this idea, something else is closely connected. The stage actor identifies himself with the character of his role. The film actor very often is denied this opportunity. His creation is by no means all of a piece. It is composed of many separate performances. Besides certain fortuitous considerations, such as cost of studio, availability of fellow players, decor, etc., there are elementary necessities of equipment that split an actor's work into a series of mountable episodes. In particular, lighting and its installation require the presentation of the event that, on the screen, unfolds as a rapid and unified scene, in a sequence of separate shootings which may take hours at the studio, not to mention more obvious montage. Thus, a jump from the window can be shot in the studio as a jump from a scaffold, and the ensuing flight, if need be, can be shot weeks later when outdoor scenes are taken. Far more paradoxical cases can easily be construed. Let us assume that an actor is supposed to be startled by a knock at the door. If his reaction is not satisfactory, the director can resort to an expedient. When the actor happens to be at the studio again, he has a shot fired behind him without being forewarned about it. The frightened reaction can be shot now and be cut into the screen version. Nothing is more strikingly shows that art has left the realm of the beautiful semblance which so far had been taken to be the only sphere where art could thrive. Nothing more strikingly shows that art has left the realm of beautiful semblance which so far had been taken to be the only sphere where art could thrive. The beautiful semblance he's speaking of is like the truth of art, the truth of surprise, the truth of shock. Like, hey, with a movie, instead of like having someone genuinely surprised at a door knocking, just fire off a gunshot, don't tell them. We can lie to our actors and take that performance. And the actor's not being true to themselves in that case, and there's something there that is lacking aura or lacking authenticity. The mechanical reproduction of shock and surprise. Of course, in montage theory, you could take that surprise shot, set it next to anything, and it completely changes the meaning of what the actor's reacting to, or even what the actor's feeling, depending on how scary or not scary the reaction shot is.
True.
Yeah, Josh, I'm definitely thinking a lot about, like, so, 1934, even a few years later, something like Citizen Kane, where Orson Welles has a slighter degree of control. Or, we were talking about how they're just talking about how films approaching the fairy tale in the early 1900s, if they saw Alien, the xenomorph, like the chestburster scene, I do question, like, what that would make them think or rethink about just media. Just Benjamin's whole wondering about the age of reproduction and what we're creating when we're so far removed. Of course, down the line, Baudrillard would get into this with, like, simulacra, which is misunderstood by The Matrix, but I do like The Matrix is a general entryway for kids to get into Baudrillard. There's not exactly a Baudrillard billboard pointing people towards him, so, it's cool to have such a fun movie that plays intertextually with those ideas. Jacob, how is this UAC Ultra level going for you?
This is honestly a lot of fun. I'm liking the interplay between, like, outdoors and indoor spaces. But also it's kind of
completely
annoying.
Dead on the floor, but we're almost through the Walter Benjamin. This is still map 2, correct? Oh, wow. I just
Yeah.
looked out a window and saw Your Massacre.
Oh yeah, yeah.
It reminds me of the scene in Prey when she finds all the dead buffalo, and it's like, did the Predator do this? No, the French did.
Yeah.
uh,
Oh man, the
y'all should
Predator
watch
show
Prey
out,
if
too,
you
the
haven't.
movie.
It is the best Predator sequel. I'll say. Maybe about equal with Predator 2. Predator 2 is pretty fun. I think Predator
I'd say they're
1.
pretty equal.
I think Predator 1's pitch perfect cinema. In all honesty.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that.
It's like Beowulf to me. It is a poem about just masculinity and its failures, and it is a nice little takedown of Reagan era Marine chuds doing their own Magnificent Seven, but supernatural sci-fi threat.
Love that.
I do think even though so another thing about Predator 1 is it does a lot of good visual storytelling. The dialogue's pretty sparse, honestly, and when it hits, it's usually very character building stuff. It's not super expository except for when they reveal like the CIA twist. So it's got a lot of good classical like filmmaking shit going on with show don't tell, and just this jungle location you're seeing these big sweaty dudes crawl through. But Predator 2, despite being a bit hammier and a bit more expository and kind of genre chewy, it kind of fundamentally still gets what the Predator is as a monster in terms of it being like it's a hunter, and it just really cranks up the fun factor on that aspect of it, where it's like, okay, well, wouldn't it be neat if we just repurpose this into an urban environment?
Yeah.
So
And they were correct.
Yeah, they were correct. I think Prey is the same thing with Prey, where it's like, okay, let's put it back in time. I really like that aspect of it. I have not watched that cartoon that came out yet, although I was excited for it.
Yeah, I'm ready to watch it. I was like, I have it saved. So was it Hulu? I think, right?
Yeah, it's up on Hulu, from what I understand.
Yeah, one of the services we gotta be a part of.
I'm pretty lost because you've been killing and driving and thriving, so I'm going to continue the Benjamin. I'm just chilling outside on what looks like some kind of hell water.
Oh shit.
Alright. 10. The feeling of strangeness that overcomes the actor before the camera, as Pirandello describes it, is basically the same kind as the estrangement felt before one's own image in the mirror. But now the reflected image has become separable, transportable, and where is it transported? Before the public. Never for a moment does the screen actor cease to be conscious of this fact. While facing the camera, he knows that ultimately he will face the public, the consumers who constitute the market. This market, where he offers not only his labor but also his whole self, his heart and soul, is beyond his reach. During the shooting, he has little contact with it, as any article made in factory. This may contribute to that oppression, that new anxiety which, according to Pirandello, grips the actor before the camera. The film responds to the shriveling of the aura with an artificial build-up of the personality outside the studio. The cult of the movie star, foisted by the money of the film industry, preserves not only the unique aura of the person, but the spell of the personality, the phony spell of commodity. So long as the movie maker's capital sets the fashion, as a rule, no other revolutionary merit can be accredited to date. So long as the movie maker's capital sets the fashion, as a rule, no other revolutionary merit can be accredited to today's film than the promotion of a revolutionary criticism of traditional concepts of art. So long as the movie maker's capital sets the fashion, as a rule, no other revolutionary merit can be accredited to today's film than the promotion of a revolutionary criticism of traditional concepts of art. We do not deny that in some cases today's films can also promote revolutionary criticism of social conditions, even of the distribution of property. However, our present study is no more specifically concerned with this than the film production of Western Europe. Okay, let me read that one more time. So long as the movie maker's capital sets the fashion, as a rule, no other revolutionary merit can be accredited to today's film than the promotion of a revolutionary criticism of traditional concepts of art. We do not deny that in some cases today's films can also promote revolutionary criticism of social conditions, even of the distribution of property. However, our present study is no more specifically concerned with this than is the film production of Western Europe. It is inherent in the technique of the film, as well as that of sports, that everybody who witnesses its accomplishments is somewhat of an expert. This is obvious to anyone listening to a group of newspaper boys leaning in on their bicycles and discussing the outcome of a bicycle race. It is not for nothing that newspaper publishers arrange races for their delivery boys. These arouse great interest among the participants, for the victor has an opportunity to rise from the delivery boy to professional racer. Similarly, the newsreel offers everyone the opportunity to rise from passerby to movie extra. In this way, any man might even find himself part of a work of art, as witness Vertov's 3 songs about linen or Ivan's Borniage. Any man today can lay claim to being filmed. This claim can be elucidated by a comparative look at the historical situation of contemporary literature. That's right, you too can be filmed. You too can post. You too can have a presence on the internet. You too can stream on Twitch.
It's true, I can.
It's interesting how we run in concentric circles around these things. You know, anyone can be an influencer now. It's not just the chance to work on a Mayo commercial and be a movie extra. It's a chance to be the next Hawk Chua.
Whoa, that could be me.
You just have to say the funny words to the camera, and hopefully the people will laugh.
I just gotta keep doing it every single week. Did I do that? Did I do that?
I didn't do it. Say the line, Bart. For centuries, a small number of writers were confronted by many thousands of readers. This changed towards the end of the last century. With the increasing extension of the press, which kept placing new political, religious, scientific, professional, and local organs before the readers, an increasing number of readers became writers. At first, occasional ones. It began with the daily press opening to its readers space for letters to the editor. And today, there's hardly a gainfully employed European who could not, in principle, find an opportunity to publish somewhere or other comments on his work, grievances, documentary reports, or that sort of thing. Thus, the distinction between author and public is about to lose its basic character. I'm going to read that again, too. Thus, the distinction between author and public is about to lose its basic character. The difference becomes merely functional. It may vary from case to case. At any moment, the reader is ready to turn into a writer. As expert, which he has become willy-nilly in an extremely specialized work process, even if only in some minor respect, the reader gains access to authorship. In the Soviet Union, work itself is given a voice. To present it verbally is part of a man's ability to perform the work. Literary license is now founded on polytechnic rather than specialized training, and thus becomes common property. All this can easily be applied to the film, where transitions that in literature took centuries have come about in a decade. In cinematic practice, particularly in Russia, this changeover has partially become established reality. Some of the players whom we meet in Russian films are not actors in our sense, but people who portray themselves, and primarily in their own work process. In Western Europe, the capitalistic exploitation of the film denies consideration to modern man's legitimate claim to being reproduced. Under these circumstances, the film industry is trying hard to spur the interest of the masses through illusion-promoting spectacles and dubious speculations.
All right.
Yeah, we're all filmmakers, we're all critics. That is something of a double-edged sword, because we do want a more educated populace who can be critical of art and who can engage with these things critically. I think it's a matter of what kind of criticism you're doing. If you're skeptical of things from a sort of structural, powerful, what is this telling us? How do people organize around this sort of sense? What is true? What is lies? What is this thing's place in our historical moment? What's it doing? What's it acting on? There's that level of criticism. But then there's also the criticism of like, well, I learned all the spreadsheet rules, and this has 5 out of 5 cinematography, 5 out of 5 acting, 2 out of 5 production value, 2 out of 5 directing, 3 out of 5 writing. Overall, I give it a 10 out of 11. Like, what does that mean? What heuristics are you evaluating movies by, and why? What heuristics are you engaging art with? What tools are you bringing to the table? Why are you interfacing with art in that way? I think is a very worthy question, because I think there is a difference between like productive consumption and just mindless consumption or depressive consumption, or you know activity that is just circular. I don't want to say wasteful, because I don't want to sound like super Protestant, like, oh, you're watching the bad stuff or you're reading the things wrong. It's more a question of like, are you approaching it with a mindset where you're happy, you're well adjusted, you're enjoying it, or like, I don't know, I think of doomer posting, or I think of approaching art and politics and news in ways that's self-immiserating. It's a question I have for some like liberal centrist types who still see fit that they should be defending something like the DNC, when it's like, you're only really alienating yourself with that stance. Just
turning everything, like all art exposure, into just a scrolling glance. Sort of like, let me have this moment, and then it's completely gone again.
Right, and like I keep a letterbox where I'll keep movies, like I'll write every now and then when I see a movie just like some thoughts or I'm reacting, but I do think there is a tendency to dive too hard into something like that, and you end up kind of just badge collecting, where instead of really like enjoying movies or sitting with them, it's just like, okay, I gotta watch my 3 today to keep up with my letterbox score, or oh, I gotta squeeze in all the content this week without really like thinking or meditating on said content.
Yeah, the rush for the content.
That's kind of why, like with Technopoverty here, I like that we're not playing just the most current stuff all the time and trying to like generate takes or be like clickbaity in that way, because that would just drive us to perform for the algorithm. We've seen other channels that do that.
We have definitely been a part of that system.
Yeah, definitely
like,
have had to work
sucks.
under that, and it's not as fun as this. Also, through this, we get to talk at a slower pace about just things we find interesting. All right, 11. The shooting of a film, especially of a sound film, affords a spectacle unimaginable anywhere at any time before this. It presents a process in which it is impossible to assign to a spectator a viewpoint which would exclude from that actual scene such extraneous accessories as camera equipment, lighting machinery, staff assistants, etc., unless his eye were on a line parallel with the lens. This circumstance, more than any other, renders superficial and insignificant any possible similarity between a scene in the studio and one on the stage. In the theater, one is well aware of the place from which the play cannot immediately be detected as illusionary. There is no such place for the movie scene that is being shot. Its illusionary nature is that of the second degree, the result of a cutting. That is to say, in the studio, the mechanical equipment has penetrated so deeply into reality that its pure aspect, freed from the foreign substance of equipment, is the result of a special procedure, namely, the shooting by the specially adjusted camera and the mounting of the shot together with other similar ones. The equipment-free aspect of reality here has become the height of artifice. The sight of immediate reality has become an orchid in the land of technology. Even more revealing is the comparison of these circumstances, which differ so much from those of the theater with the situation in painting. Here the question is, how does the cameraman compare with the painter? To answer this, we take recourse to an analogy with a surgical operation. The surgeon represents the polar opposite of the magician. The magician heals a sick person by laying on the hands. The surgeon cuts into the patient's body. The magician maintains the natural distance between the patient and himself, though he reduces it very slightly by the laying on of hands. He greatly increases it by virtue of his authority. The surgeon does exactly the reverse. He greatly diminishes the distance between himself and the patient by penetrating into the patient's body, and increases it but little by the caution with which his hand moves among the organs. In short, in contrast to the magician, who is still hidden in the medical practitioner, The surgeon at the decisive moment abstains from facing the patient man to man. Rather, it is through the operation that he penetrates into him. Magician and surgeon compare to painter and cameraman. The painter maintains in his work a natural distance from reality. The cameraman penetrates deeply into its web. There is a tremendous difference between the pictures they obtain. That of the painter is a total one. That of the cameraman consists of multiple fragments, which are assembled under a new law. Thus, for contemporary man, the reproduction of reality by film is incomparably more significant than that of the painter, since it offers, precisely because of the thoroughgoing permeation of reality with mechanical equipment, an aspect of reality which is free of all equipment. And that is what one is entitled to ask from a work of art. 12. Mechanical reproduction of art changes the reaction of the masses towards art. The reactionary attitude toward a Picasso painting changes into progressive reaction toward a Chaplin movie. The progressive reaction is characterized by the direct, intimate fusion of visual and emotional enjoyment with the orientation of the expert. Such fusion is of great social significance. The greater the decrease in the social significance of an art form, the sharper the distinction between criticism and enjoyment by the public. The conventional is uncritically enjoyed, and the truly new is criticized with aversion. Oh, cool. Beat a level, eh?
We did it.
Hell yeah. The Promised Land. Next map. Dang, yeah. So these are a bit grayer than previous, but I am liking how tall they are. Must consume content. What up, Evan? We're reading Walter Benjamin's The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction while playing through UAC Ultra 2. Thanks for tuning in. Beat the game level is such... Yeah, it is. We didn't complete it. We beat it. We tore it down. We took it into submission.
Apologies.
Alright, we're going to start chapter 12 again. Mechanical reproduction of art changes the reaction of the masses towards the art. The reactionary attitude toward a Picasso painting changes into the progressive reaction toward a Chaplin movie. The progressive reaction is characterized by the direct, intimate fusion of visual and emotional enjoyment with the orientation of the expert. Such fusion is of great social significance. The greater the decrease in the social significance of an art form, the sharper the distinction between criticism and enjoyment by the public. The conventional is uncritically enjoyed, and the truly new is criticized with aversion. With regard to the screen, the critical and the receptive attitudes... Oh, again, thin pages. With regard to the screen, the critical and receptive attitudes of the public coincide. The decisive reason for this is that individual reactions are predetermined by the mass audience response they are about to produce, and this is nowhere more pronounced than in the film. The moment these responses become manifest, they control each other. Again, the comparison with painting is fruitful. A painting has always had an excellent chance to be viewed by one person or by a few. The simultaneous contemplation of paintings by a large public, such as developed in the 19th century, is an early symptom of the crisis of painting. A crisis which was by no means occasioned exclusively by photography, but rather in a relatively independent manner by the appeal of artworks to the masses. Yeah, so as you start opening up art to the masses, it gets into this question of like the uncritical and the conventional versus the more challenging stuff, and it gets harder to maybe, as we corporatize and industrialize and balloon up film budgets and productions of propaganda, it might get a bit harder to make the stuff with soul. Sound familiar? Painting simply is in no position to present an object for simultaneous collective experience, as it was possible for architecture at all times, for the epic poem in the past, and for the movie today. Although this circumstance in itself should not lead one to conclusions about the social role of painting, it does constitute a serious threat as soon as painting, under special conditions and, as it were, against its nature, is confronted directly by the masses. In the churches and monasteries of the Middle Ages, and at the princely courts up to the end of the 18th century, a collective reception of paintings did not occur simultaneously, but by gradual and hierarchized mediation. A collective reception of paintings did not occur simultaneously, but by graduated and hierarchized mediation. The change that has come about is an expression of the particular conflict in which painting was implicated by the mechanical reproducibility of paintings. Although paintings began to be publicly exhibited in galleries and salons, there was no way for the masses to organize and control themselves in their reception. Thus, the same public which responds in a progressive manner towards a grotesque film is bound to respond in a reactionary manner to surrealism. Oh, let me check in on the chat before continuing to chapter 13.
Oh god.
I do not know a good Google Docs alternative unless you're just going straight up offline.
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't used Microsoft Prox for a while either. I wouldn't trust Word. There might be... I'll have to go digging for it. I had a PNG of like a lot of open source free alternatives to both productivity software like Office and also like Photoshop and Adobe alternatives. I think GIMP was the Photoshop alternative it recommended.
Jesus.
GIMP and Crite. Yeah, I gotta find that image again and share it on the Discord because it had a lot of things besides. I remember it had some editing alternatives and some Photoshop alternatives. Sadly, because of the nature of my work, I have to interface with other people who are using Creative Suite to do their things. So
Yeah.
I'm a little locked into Premiere in that sense because of the macro structure of the industry. But I mean, DaVinci Resolve has a free version that's pretty powerful and robust for any of you that want to get into maybe some editing stuff that's more advanced than like Movie Maker or iMovie or whatever the basic stuff is out there these days. Crite? I'll have to look into Crite because honestly, every time I open up Photoshop, I feel like I forgot everything I've ever learned about Photoshop from the previous session, even though I've been using Photoshop to do things for years.
Yeah.
See, it's interesting because now with mechanical reproducibility, just the ownership lines even further blurred in the digital age. "13. The characteristics of the film lie not only in the manner in which man presents himself to mechanical equipment, but also in the manner in which, by means of his apparatus, man can represent his environment. A glance at occupational psychology illustrates the testing capacity of the equipment. Psychoanalysis illustrates it in a different perspective. The film has enriched our field of perception with methods which can be illustrated by those of Freudian theory. 50 years ago, a slip of the tongue passed more or less unnoticed. Only exceptionally may such a slip have revealed dimensions of depth in a conversation which had seemed to be taking its course on the surface. Since the psychopathology of everyday life, things have changed. This book isolated and made analyzable things which had heretofore floated along unnoticed in the broad stream of perception. For the entire spectrum of optical, and now also acoustical perception, the film has brought about a similar deepening of our perception. It is only in obverse of this fact that behavior items shown in a movie can be analyzed much more precisely and from more points of view than those presented in paintings or on the stage. As compared with painting, filmed behavior lends itself more readily to analysis because of its incomparably more precise statements of the situation. In comparison with the stage scene, the filmed behavior lends itself more readily to analysis because it can be isolated more easily. This circumstance derives its chief importance from its tendency to promote the mutual penetration of art and science. Actually, of a screened behavior item which is neatly brought out in a certain situation, like the muscle of a body, it is difficult to say which is more fascinating, its artistic value or its value for science. To demonstrate the identity of the artistic and scientific uses of photography, which heretofore usually were separated, will be one of the revolutionary functions of the film. So he's giving film credit for scientific observation. He is talking about, though, that film behavior does lend itself better to analysis, and this is a bit of an illusion of the camera as well. If you film people long enough, I mean, I've been editing video essays for a couple years now. We're always cutting out the likes. We're always cutting out the ums. If there's any kind of tongue slip-ups or breaths or we make it as presentable and get rid of all the unpleasant parts. And the thing is, in real life, everybody has that when they're talking and when they're slipping up. They'll do their likes, they'll do their ums, they'll do their repetitions. I do it all the time here, even on the stream, as I'm trying to figure out a better presentation mode. But we get so accommodated to this that we then see a recording of people. But we get so accommodated to this, and then we see a recording of people unedited, and they're doing slip-ups and stuff, and it messes with our heads because despite it being more natural, it doesn't look real because we've attenuated. We have a different standard of what we consider real when it comes to what's on screen. Yeah, Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. Good luck on that search, Evan. The Oscars. Yeah, Josh, the Oscars is a good point. Oh, any kind of live ceremony, you see celebrities slightly out of form, especially movie stars, because I don't want to start like a fight between drama kids here, but stage actors do have to run through the whole thing live on stage in front of an audience. I'm not dissing movie stars. It's just they can be edited. They can take lines and do pickups and do re-recordings. The editor can fuck with their performance in ways that either enhance or de-hance it. Also, just the read on intentionality, what Benjamin's talking about here. You can cut in. The camera can direct itself to a close-up on a twitch or a hand gesture or a slip of the tongue, Just a quick cut in when somebody whispers something themselves before it cuts back out. It's a more directed and curated thing, and it changes the way we think about our behaviors. Think about the way now how TikTok and internet memes and just doing your own dances and performances for social media, how that's kind of adjusted the way the culture talks. I mean, at the worst, we see dudes who have cameras on all the time and are like, chat, like, what do I do next? It's they turn their life into a choose-your-own-adventure game for the clicks. Novel, but that seems like a completely different type of hell.
Yeah.
By close-ups of the things around us, by focusing on hidden details of familiar objects, by exploring commonplace milieus under the ingenious guidance of the camera, the film, on the one hand, extends our comprehension of the necessities which rule our lives. On the other hand, it manages to assure us of an immense and unexpected field of action. Our taverns and our metropolitan streets, our offices and our furnished rooms, our railroad stations and our factories appear to have us locked up hopelessly. Then came the film, and burst this prison world asunder by the dynamite of the 10th of the second, so that now, in the midst of its far-flung ruins and debris, we calmly and adventurously go traveling. With the close-up, space expands. With slow motion, movement is extended. The enlargement of a snapshot does not simply render more precise what in any case was visible, though unclear, it reveals entirely new structural formations of the subject. So too, slow motion not only presents familiar qualities of movement, but reveals in them entirely unknown ones, which, far from looking like stunted rapid movements, give the effect of a singularly gliding, floating, supernatural motion. Evidently, a different nature opens itself up to the camera than opens it up to the naked eye, if only because an unconsciously penetrated space is substituted for a space consciously explored by man. Even if one has a general knowledge of the way people walk, one knows nothing of a person's posture during the fractional second of a stride. The act of reaching for a lighter or a spoon is a familiar routine. Yet we hardly know what really goes on between hand and metal, not to mention how this fluctuates with our moods. Here, the camera intervenes with the resources of its lowerings and liftings, its interruptions and its isolations, its extensions and accelerations, its enlargements and reductions. The camera introduces us to unconscious optics, as does psychoanalysis to unconscious impulses. Boom. Sorry, I'm getting a little excited reading this thing. It's been a moment, but I read this in college, and I remember it really just sending off fireworks in my head, and it still does so much good as far as conveying just the perception of the moving picture and the way it affects our mind. And, needs to be considered. In the same way that video games give us new verbs and modes of thinking that become commonplace, I mean, it's pure artifice. I mean, all art is. That's what art is short for. But to think that, you know, it's a demon, it's a pinky, it's getting shotgunned in the face. Jacob, how does that feel? Just the haptic pop of killing a Doom demon.
It feels great. It's very gratifying. Also, this map is huge.
As Jacob's talked about in the past with tricking rocks into doing math, and as we've talked about, I think it was during the Berserk run, we were talking about the fantasy of video games and the way, at what point do all these compounding bits and boops and blapes start to feel real? And it's certainly not a matter of it just looking real, because Fugitive Hunter, I guess, looks slightly more realistic in some sense than Doom. And that just makes it worse to interact with, because it looks real, but it is very clearly limited as a video game. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I remember there's an old copy pasta mathing out how fast the Doom Marine would run in real life if he moves at the rate he does in the game. And it's something extremely absurd. It's multiple hundreds of kilometers per hour. You would be liquid. If you ran as fast as Jacob and I have been moving through these maps. But it feels right for Doom. It feels more real than Fugitive Hunter. It feels appropriate for trekking through hell. Jacob mentioned the tunnel earlier. I think a big issue with Fugitive Hunter was in trying to look more realistic. The levels at times didn't want to look boxed in or boxed off, which in Doom provides direction, but in Fugitive Hunter, you just end up running into like an invisible wall, or it stops making video game sense because it's trying to make real life spatial sense, and that doesn't quite jam with the way the player has to navigate. Like, think about how you can't see your feet in a first-person shooter. I know some newer ones do that, but think about just the way you glide through space. Like, you don't really see in the same way as you do with a HUD and all that on. And I don't just mean the numbers and the bumps. I mean the actual field of view and the way there's a fixed point in the center that's always being tracked. Like, no, you can move your eyeballs, you can move your head. There's multiple points of articulation there. There's so many differences between what a video game does to make it feel immersive and what your body does in real life. And you don't notice those. You get used to the video game language when video games are doing it right.
Yeah. Ooh.
Yeah, this is the tension in all art between grounded realism and theme or flow exists in writing and games. Yeah, this is also something going all the way back to the Maximo run Tolkien talks about with On Fairy Tales, where he talks about the fantasy author, in his opinion, being more admirable, or he holds in higher esteem than just a realist dramatic author, because a fantasy author has to make a green sun feel real. Like the fake details and the unreal objects have to be existent in the reader's head. He can't just rely on saying like, oh, two people were sitting at a counter, one was eating eggs while the other smoked a cigar. Like, you know what those things are enough to where you get the description. Whereas like in a fantasy story, there's a harder sell.
Yeah.
14. One of the foremost tasks of art has always been the creation of a demand which could be fully satisfied only later. The history of every art form shows the critical epochs in which a certain art form aspires to the effects which could be fully obtained only with a changed technical standard, that is to say, in a new art form. The extravagance and crudities of art which thus appear, particularly in the so-called decadent epochs, actually arise from the nucleus of its richest historical energies. In recent years, such barbarisms were abundant in Dadaism. It is only now that its impulse becomes discernible. Dadaism attempted to create by pictorial and literary means the effects which the public today seeks in film. James Cameron's raising the bar.
Always raising the bar.
Yeah, I mean, this is something we do see in movies where it's a matter of like, well, are they just cashing in on a fad, or are they trying to do something original and new? There's that yearning for the new thing, for the new form, for seeking what we feel frustrated we can't yet attain. Why not both? Yeah, let's go for both.
Yeah.
I agree, Josh, as far as the why not both. If you're talking in regards to Tolkien holding the fantasist more in high esteem than the realist, I think, it's his preference. He is writing on fantasy. I get what he's saying about fantasy being a harder sell, but I think that because realist drama can rely more on realism as shorthand, it has to be more interesting conflict-wise, or it's a harder investment because it's like, well, I can just go live my real grass-touching life and get what this story is selling to me. No, like, there still has to be something interesting about that realist drama, and that might be harder to construct than a fantasy plot. So yeah, why not both?
We want it all.
Yeah, I'd say this, like, open to all genres. Like, take in everything.
Yeah. Good is good.
Yeah, some genre stuff is also just very much operating on metaphor in reference in a way where it's like, oh, you need to know 5 other things before you can read this author just to understand either the technology they're referencing or the philosopher they're riffing on. And also, I find, at least in fantasy works, it's very dependent on how good the author is at getting across the sense of world and doing their world building. Sometimes it can be a very exposition-heavy, stuck-in-the-mud sensibility whenever an author's explaining what's going on versus... I don't know, I've always been a fan of the more haptic and immediate, don't tell me everything about the world, just tell me the most important details as they cause tensions and conflicts with our characters. It's a very challenging balance, but I think some movies, just to get across what we're talking about, I think some movies that get my preferred mode of fantasy world building across very well, it's like Nausicaa and the Valley of the Wind, The Matrix. A New Hope is actually gangbusters at this. You know, for how much lore is known about Star Wars now, keep in mind how much of that developed over the years as part of tabletop books and novels, and side stories and spin-offs and such. A New Hope, while it does mention stuff like the Clone Wars, Darth Vader, the Force, Jedi, a lot of those details only come into play because they're like direct obstacles or tensions with what Luke and Obi-Wan are trying to do. It's very economical in that sense. I actually think the scene where I find your lack of faith disturbing. That whole scene is excellent as far as just being effective at telling you who the Empire is. It's an exposition scene, but it so dramatically also conveys not just what the bad guys are up to, but what the power structure in the Empire is as far as who listens to Tarkin, who listens to Vader, who takes Vader unseriously versus who takes Vader seriously, what Vader can actually do. And then on top of it all, it is planting the seeds of the Empire actually losing at the end of the movie because they're all at each other's throats. So there's still multiple layers of storytelling going on. It's not just the bad guys laying out the bad guy plot. There is a lot of character building for both the character of the Empire, the character of Tarkin, and the character of Vader going on in that scene. It's perfect cinema. And I know that sounds silly because it's Star Wars. What can I say? I like Alphaville, I like the 400 Blows, I like everything, but there's a reason Star Wars is such a burnt-in cultural memory.
Yeah, it's not just a fluke. It's got a lot of things happening.
I can take criticisms of the other ones. I'm one of those people that doesn't think Empire Strikes Back is better than A New Hope. I think A New Hope's just literally one of the greatest pieces of American cinema as far as what you can do with movies and what has historically been done with movies.
Yeah,
Star Wars also gets a lot of mileage off of real-world analogy. You're right, Josh. Oh, sorry about that, Jacob.
Oh no, you're all good. I was just saying, like, the big thing that always stuck with me is just like it's so tangible. Everything feels like you can reach out and touch a thing.
Right, and that's why Andor works so well and is in my mind in lineage with A New Hope, because it's doing the same things where it's like back to basics of like fantasy genre storytelling, where like things have tension and weight. I've brought this up before, but that first scene of the first episode of Andor where he shoots an Imperial bad guy, and that's a problem. You know, so much lazy Star Wars storytelling is like, okay, they shoot all the stormtroopers, scene's over, they move to the next spot. But when Andor did that from scene one, that was signifying to me like, okay, this is actually different. This isn't going to be Obi-Wan or the Book of Boba Fett, which by contrast are very weightless and bad at having any heft or consequential feelings or momentum to their storytelling. I do think, though, I find it interesting. This is a definite tangent, not really related to the rest, but on the note of Obi-Wan, I think one of Filoni's weaknesses, this is some deep Star Wars nerd stuff, I don't know if you're familiar with Dave Filoni, Jacob. He's like the creative, he's a creative
a little bit
on like the Clone Wars and a few other Star Wars things. I do think Filoni's
and like George
strengths,
Lucas loves him or whatever.
I don't know. Yeah, actually, I don't know how George Lucas feels about him, but like, I'd imagine they had a good relationship because he worked on Clone Wars and stuff before the Disney buyout, and like really did build out the lore for the prequels.
Yeah, he's very big in that lore, but I'm like, I like Star Wars a lot. I am not like a huge Star Wars fan. Like,
yeah, and I've started this tangent because I want to say I didn't like Obi-Wan, and I thought Ashoka wasn't bad. I'll say that. If I hadn't had to endure Boba Fett and Obi-Wan before it, I may have had stronger feelings on it, but I mean, it's kind of like the later seasons of The Mandalorian suffer as well. As I think Filoni's very good at writing stories in a cartoonish sense or for animation or comic books more than live action. Because one of my issues with Obi-Wan is the way scenes would kind of end or cut away or not resolve. It felt very Saturday morning cartoon. And I know Clone Wars gets more mature as it goes on and stuff, but again, when talking about things looking more real on movie screens than they do in real life, because we're used to having all the likes and ums and ahs and repeated lines cut out, certain things play in animation smoother than live action because your brain's kind of like, okay, it's a cartoon, it may behave by different rules, whereas in live action, you're like, that's not how the laws of physics work.
Yeah. Which is funny why we can tell, like, why younger people can tell AI faster than old people.
Yeah, and so like
those kinds of things.
So like, because I noticed a lot of times with Obi-Wan, I'd be like, well, that's a weird transition or whatever, and I'd be like, if this were a cartoon, I probably wouldn't be as bothered by this because it's like, I don't want to say it's like excusable or paste up sloppy storytelling, but I think as Josh Foreman's talking about the tension between grounded realism and theme and flow, I think with an animated or stylized animation thing, the audience is thinking less about anything grounded or real and just kind of like, what mood's this putting me in? What vibe am I getting from this? I mean, it's the classic anime thing where like people get very hype and very emotionally invested in anime, and they can do super unrealistic stuff in anime that you have no sense of what it feels like in the real world because you just can't do it, but there's an emotional weight and an emotional truth to it, and so I think Filoni's good at getting across that kind of emotional texture within the animated form that's not quite there in his live action stuff.
That's fair. I remember of all those the newer-ish Star Wars things, I remember liking the Han Solo movie better than I thought I was going to. I thought I was going to really despise it. And I don't remember anything about it. I just remember I liked it better than any of the other things that were coming out at the same time. I still see vague hate
complaints about Solo, and I'm just like, I don't know. I thought it was a fun romp. More Star Wars stories without Jedi as the main focus, where we're just seeing people like struggling to exist within the setting.
Yeah, makes people who actually shows how bad like the Empire actually is was very compelling.
All right, I'm getting back to the Benjamin. Back to the Benjamins. Oh, pardon me, burping up my horchata. Every fundamentally new pioneering creation of demands will carry beyond its goal. Dadaism did so to the extent that it sacrificed the market values which are so characteristic of the film in favor of higher ambitions, though of course it was not conscious of such intentions as here described. Dadaism, just to give you a quick rundown, was an art movement, I believe, in the 1920s. It was kind of a reaction towards what is, being explained here by Benjamin, is it was kind of a rebellion against fascist standards, kind of in Italy. I believe Piss Christ is one of its most famous pieces. That's Jesus Christ in a urine of piss. It's either that or the urinal is another famous Dadaist piece. I forget. I don't think the urinal is its proper name. I'm being so bad about citations here, but it's a urinal is the piece. It's like a rusted up, beat up urinal. I think Dadaism's cool. I'm not going to be one of those people who was like, look at this art. This is just so pretentious. That is definitely a fascist impulse. Because it challenges the structure of things. Okay, Piss Christ was later. Got that, Josh. Yeah, I honestly did not do a brushing up on Dadaism before jumping into this episode today. I was looking into the Luddites for a reason that will become clear as we continue playing Doom, but left myself a blind spot. Okay, yeah, Piss Christ 1987. Definitely a retraction on my end then. Let me just look up, make sure the urinal's actually Dadaist as well. Holding myself to account. Yeah, the urinal was called Fountain by Marcel Duchamp, 1917. But yeah, it was kind of a fuck you to the standardized projected values. An early seed of postmodern thought in terms of challenging the perceptions of modernism and fascism. Are Mutt's best piece. Okay, let me get back to the Benjamin. The Dadaists attached much less importance to the sales value of their works than to its uselessness for contemplative immersion. The studied degradation of their material was not the least of their means to achieve this uselessness. Their poems are word salad, containing obscenities and every imaginable waste product of language. Echoes of Burroughs. The same is true of their paintings, on which they mounted buttons and tickets. What they attended and achieved was a relentless destruction of the aura of their creations, which they branded as reproductions with the very means of production. Before a painting of Arps or a poem by August Strom, it is impossible to take time for contemplation and evaluation as one would before a canvas of terrain, or a poem by Rilke. In the decline of middle-class society, contemplation became a school for asocial behavior. It was countered by distraction as a variant of social conduct. Dadaistic activities actually assured a rather vehement distraction by making works of art the center of scandal. One requirement was foremost, the outrage of the public. From an alluring appearance or persuasive structure of sound, the work of art of the Dadaists became an instrument of ballistics. It hit the spectator like a bullet. It happened to him, thus acquiring a tactile quality. It promoted a demand for the film, the distancing element of which is also primarily tactile, being based on changes of place and focus which periodically assail the spectator. Let us compare the screen on which a film unfolds with the canvas of a painting. The painting invites the spectator to contemplation. Before it, the spectator can abandon himself into his associations. Before the movie frame, he cannot do so. No sooner has his eye grasped the scene than it has already changed. It cannot be arrested. Duhamel, who detests the film and knows nothing of its significance, though something of its structure, notes this circumstance as follows. I can no longer think what I want to think. My thoughts have been replaced by moving images. The spectator's process of association in view of these images is indeed interrupted by their constant, sudden change. This constitutes the shock effect of the film, which, like all shocks, should be cushioned by heightened presence of mind. By means of its technical structure, the film has taken the physical shock effect out of the wrappers in which Dadaism had, as it were, kept it inside the moral shock effect. Yeah, you can't sit with a movie. You can't think of a movie. It moves too fast. It's not like a painting. It's not like a photograph. I can't meditate on this. It's telling me what to do. It's controlling my every whim. Jacob, how's this level directing you?
I'm having a lot of fun, honestly. This one's been really fun exploring, and got some good ones, but my god, are there just so many demons.
Yeah, it seems like you've been
everywhere,
mining away for a while there in this curated hellspace. What could the meaning of this be? What kind of story is UAC Ultra 2 trying to tell us, if any?
Oh lord.
My thoughts have been replaced by moving images. Interestingly, I have this problem with music videos. I need to hear the song first before seeing a video for it, or I can't really appreciate the music. You know what, Josh? I feel...
Interesting.
I'm not going to say I feel the same way about music in terms of needing to listen to the song before the video, but anime openings. I know people really get into anime OPs and they will stick in their head instantly. It takes me a while. There are a few like anime OPs like that just sound like noise to me, or they sound too dense on their instruments. So it takes me a moment to really suss out like what melody I like about it, or what's catchy within it. Which seems to not be common. Most people seem to like be very diehard about anime OPs. They don't work on me in the same way other songs though, but perhaps it's also because, people are watching their shows and they associate the song with their favorite shows in a way that contextualizes their enjoyment of it in a way that's not just like listening to a solo song. Like, I really think the Neon Genesis Evangelion opening is a banger, but I haven't openly listened to it. I haven't directly searched it up to listen to it since my rewatch of it, really, a few years back. Same with the JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Stardust Crusaders openings. I had those on heavy repeats as gym music for a while there, but I kind of stopped with JoJo for a moment. Same with Demon Slayer music. In the moment while I'm watching the shows, I'm all for it, but I don't always constantly watch anime. It's in rotation less than I would like it to be. I do want to watch more anime, but yeah, there's too much other types of music not tied to television properties. I seek out above that kind of stuff, I guess. Alright, 15. The mass is a matrix from which all traditional behavior towards works of art issues today in a new form. Quantity has been transmuted into quality. The greatly increased mass of participants has produced a change in the mode of participation. The fact that the new mode of participation first appeared in a disreputable form must not confuse the spectator. Yet some people have launched spirited attacks against precisely this superficial aspect. Among these, Duhamel has expressed himself in the most radical manner. What he objects to most is the kind of participation which the movie elicits from the masses. Duhamel calls the movie a pastime for helots, a diversion for uneducated, wretched, worn-out creatures who are consumed by their worries, a spectacle which requires no concentration and presupposes no intelligence, which kindles no light in the heart and awakens no hope other than the ridiculous one of someday becoming a star in Los Angeles. Clearly, this is at the bottom. Yeah, I'll go take the substance, I'll be Demi Moore. That's the only thing movies can teach me. Huge disagree there, Duhamel, although I see where you're coming from. I do kind of agree. ingested in the wrong manner, you can become a bit too much of a removed voyeur pervert type as far as ingesting too many movies and always seeing your life through the screen goes. I think it's another good lesson of I Saw the TV Glow. Damn, shots fired. That's right. Let's read that harsh takedown one more time, just because I was also thinking, wow, this guy would have some hate for what the moving image has become.
Yeah, right? What does he feel about TikTok?
Duhamel calls the movie a pastime for helots, a diversion for uneducated, wretched, worn-out creatures who are consumed by their worries. A spectacle which requires no concentration and presupposes no intelligence, which kindles no light in the heart and awakens no hope other than the ridiculous one of someday becoming a star in Los Angeles. You know, somewhere over the rainbow.
Man, I want that tattooed on me.
That's where you'll find me. Clearly, this is at the bottom of the same ancient lament that the masses seek distraction, whereas art demands concentration from the spectator. So see Benjamin's like, this is nothing new. That is a commonplace. The question remains whether it provides a platform for the analysis of the film. A closer look is needed here. Distraction and concentration form polar opposites, which may be stated as follows. A man who concentrates before a work of art is absorbed by it. He enters into this work of art the way legend tells of the Chinese painter when he viewed his finished painting. In contrast, the distracted mass absorbs the work of art. This is most obvious with regard to buildings. Architecture has always represented the prototype of a work of art. Architecture has always represented the prototype of a work of art, the reception of which is consummated by a collectivity in a state of distraction. The laws of its reception are most instructive. So, real high praise for architecture here, which kind of makes sense to me more than I've thought about it in the past, in the sense that, like, oh yeah, before cameras and mass broadcasting apparatuses, a huge-ass building is something that would command attention, and it's something that would be a shared, visible object. I think something worth noting here is, when this essay was written, we didn't really have home video systems, or, you know, we had radio. I don't know. I need to double check, cross check years. I don't believe this was around for the time of like broadcast television. But you couldn't replay movies or have movies on access in the same way you do now, where you can watch them over and over and over again and really meditate on it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the presupposes no intelligence is actually pretty on point, Josh Foreman, as you're saying. Yeah, this is something I think I find interesting about the history of the musical as well, is because the musical in America was playing towards multiple ethnicities of immigrants and audiences and cultural types in America. When, you know, Broadway was first starting and all that. And so it had to do, I don't want to say lowest common denominator, because I don't like the class distinction that implies as far as like, oh, the masses are so stupid, but it had to do an averaging act. And I think that's a kinder way of making that presupposition than to say it presupposes no intelligence. But yeah, this is also why I remember finding movies interesting and why I was kind of more passionate to make movies than, say, make video games or write books, is because I do feel movies are more international. You know, video games are getting a bit better about it, but you still have to interact. Also, because video games, you have to interact with them. There's the mechanical aspect of actually playing the game and doing the work, whereas a movie you can just sit back and watch in a passive manner. But yeah, short of subtitles, a lot of, you know, movies, they translate pretty well across borders, and they seem more universal than, say, the video game, or even a book, which has to be translated and imagined. Again, the movie's giving you the images. But something about that within movies made them appeal to me in ways the other art forms didn't. It's like, oh, cool, I want to see what's going on in other countries. Like, Jacob, do you remember the first, like, international movie you saw where you're like, oh, wow, something outside of America?
Man, it was something in India. I know that for sure. Some Bollywood movie. I was like, what is this?
Did you ever see, like...
Absolutely blew me away.
Have you ever seen Turkish Star Wars?
No, that sounds great though.
Okay, yeah. There's like a Turkish Star Wars, Turkish Rambo. It's a whole subgenre of like 70s and 80s just C-rate kind of American exploitation, like Turkish adaptations of things.
I do love Italian Spider-Man.
I was about to say
Italian
Spider-Man is playing off of that lineage. Like what it's parodying that thing.
Yeah.
Where like there'd be, these Eastern European adaptations of licensed American properties that were, clearly not the same thing.
Yeah. What a great thing. I love art. I love stuff like that.
Enjoy the walk, Josh. We're about to finish up Walter Benjamin here. We're on the verge of hitting the epilogue, so let's continue on chapter 15. Ooh, pardon me. Buildings have been man's companions since primeval times. Since the dawn of time, man has always loved his buildings. But what happens when the buildings say, no more?
9/11.
This is when buildings attack. Building... I don't want to go too hard into, like, pointing out the reference, but that is a Simpsons bit about when buildings attack, and I bring it up because I'm like, Jacob, do you remember the days of advertising for VHSs of, like, worst car accidents or storms gone wild or just... I mean, even backyard wrestling, just all these. You used to have to order. You used to have to order your YouTube videos, chat. They'd come on VHS compilations that you'd have to order on the phone, and they'd be advertised.
Pay and wait for.
Yeah. They'd be advertised to us, and it was organized by topic. Do you want buildings? Do you want car accidents? Do you want Girls Gone Wild? Do you want bum fights? What genre of YouTube do you want to order on VHS? Because that's what the 90s were.
It's pretty incredible.
Buildings have been man's companions since primeval times. Many art forms have developed and perished. Tragedy begins with the Greeks, is extinguished with them, and after centuries, its rules only are revived. The epic poem, which had its origin in the youth of nations, expires in Europe at the end of the Renaissance. Panel painting is a creation of the Middle Ages, and nothing guarantees its uninterrupted existence. But the human need for shelter is lasting. Architecture has never been idle. Its history is more ancient than that of any other art, and its claim to being a living force has significance in every attempt to comprehend the relationship of the masses to art. Buildings are appropriated in a twofold manner, by use and by perception, or rather, by touch and sight. Such appropriation cannot be understood in terms of the attentive concentration of a tourist before a famous building. On the tactile side, there's no counterpart to the contemplation on the optical side. Tactile appropriation is accomplished not so much by attention as by habit. As regards to architecture, habit determines to a large extent even optical reception. The latter, too, occurs much less through rapt attention than by noticing the object in incidental fashion. This mode of appropriation, developed with reference to architecture, in certain circumstances acquires canonical value. For the tasks which face the human apparatus of perception at the turning points of history cannot be solved by optical means, that is, by contemplation alone. For the tasks which face the human apparatus of perception at the turning points of history cannot be solved by optical means, that is, by contemplation alone. They are mastered gradually by habit, under the guidance of tactile appropriation. The distracted person, too, can form habits. More, the ability to master certain tasks in a state of distraction proves that their solution has become a matter of habit. Distraction, as provided by art, presents a covert control, the extent to which new tasks have become solvable by a perception. Since, moreover, individuals are tempted to avoid such tasks, art will tackle the most difficult and most important ones where it is able to mobilize the masses. Today it does so in the film, Reception in the state of distraction, which is increasingly noticeably in fields of art and is symptomatic of profound changes in apperception, finds the film its true means of exercise. The film, with its shock effect, meets this mode of reception halfway. The film makes the cult value recede into the background, not only by putting the public in the position of the critic, but also by the fact that at the movies this position requires no attention. The public is an examiner, but an absent-minded one. Yeah, it sounds like modern-day consume complaints in some ways. The public is an examiner, but an absent-minded one. Yeah, this really is before a lot of semiotic play came in with films. Films were still very much in a fundamentally straightforward storytelling mode. I'd be curious what Walter Benjamin thinks of David Lynch, is what I'll say. When we start getting movies that are more like puzzles, that would be, another generation, though. It is reminding me, though, especially talking about architecture, Jacob, you've mentioned the difference between, seeing a picture of the Grand Canyon and going to the Grand Canyon and seeing the Grand Canyon.
Yeah. It's a very, very clear difference too. I was just thinking too of buildings that were effective. When I lived in New York City, I used to go to a restaurant that was at the base of the Empire State Building, and I thought it was very funny having a sandwich served at a building that was so iconic for New York City that it was just, yeah, we serve sandwiches here too.
I'm going to
Something about that was
rejoin the
very
game because for
humorous.
some reason my audio went out. I was too idle because I was reading.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, yeah.
Bear with me,
Oh my
chat.
God.
I'm rejoining the game.
That's right. Ah, damn it.
And there we are. Yeah, once again, killer music. That's been a excellent piece of just both these UAC Ultra episodes, is the music. The tunes.
Yeah.
The bitchin' jams.
Truly. It shreds,
All right, here's the epilogue. We're gonna finish this epilogue, and then we can jump back to dooming it up. Epilogue. The growing proletariatization of modern man and the increasing formation of masses are two aspects of the same process. Fascism attempts to organize the newly created proletarian masses without affecting the property structure which the masses strive to eliminate. Fascism attempts to organize the newly created proletarian masses without affecting the property structure which the masses strive to eliminate. Fascism sees its salvation in giving these masses not their right, but instead a chance to express themselves. The masses have a right to change property relations. Fascism seeks to give them an expression while preserving property. The logical result of fascism is the introduction of aesthetics into political life. The violation of the masses, whom fascism, with its Führer cult, forces to their knees, has its counterpart in the violation of an apparatus which is pressed into the production of ritual values. All efforts to render politics aesthetic culminate in one thing: war. War, and war only, can set a goal for mass movements on the largest scale while respecting the traditional property system. This is the political formula for the situation. The technological formula may be stated as follows. Only war makes it possible to mobilize all of today's technical resources while maintaining the property system. It goes without saying that the fascist apotheosis of war does not employ such arguments. Still, Marinetti says in his manifesto on the Ethiopian colonial war, "For 27 years, we futurists had rebelled against the branding of war as anti-aesthetic. Accordingly, we state, war is beautiful because it establishes man's dominion over the subjugated machinery by means of gas masks, terrifying megaphones, flamethrowers, and small tanks. War is beautiful because it initiates the drift of metallization of the human body. War is beautiful because it enriches a flowering meadow with the fiery orchids of machine guns. War is beautiful because it combines the gunfire, the cannonades, the ceasefire, the scents, and the stench of putrefaction into a symphony. War is beautiful because it creates new architecture, like that of the big tanks, the geometrical formation flights, the smoke spirals from burning villages, and many others. Poets and artists of futurism, remember these principles of an aesthetics of war so that your struggle for new literature and a new graphic art may be illuminated by them. This manifesto has the virtue of clarity. Its formulations deserve to be accepted by dialecticians. To the latter, the aesthetics of today's war appears as follows. If the natural utilization of productive forces is impeded by the property system, the increase in technical devices, in speed, and in the sources of energy will press for an unnatural utilization, and this is found in war. The destructiveness of war furnishes proof that society has not been mature enough to incorporate technology as its organ, that technology has not been sufficiently developed to cope with the elemental forces of society. The horrible features of imperialistic warfare are attributable to the discrepancy between the tremendous means of production and their inadequate utilization in the process of production. In other words, to unemployment and the lack of markets. Imperialistic war is a rebellion of technology which collects, in the form of human material, the claims to which society has denied its natural material. Instead of draining rivers, society directs a human stream into the bed of trenches. Instead of dropping seeds from airplanes, it drops incendiary bombs over critics, and through gas warfare the aura is abolished in a new way. Fiat ars, purat mundus, says fascism. Let art be made, let the world perish. And as Marinetti admits, expects war to supply the artistic gratification of a sense perception that has been changed by technology. This is evidently the consummation of art pour art, art for art. Mankind, which in Homer's time was an object of contemplation for the Olympian gods, now is one for itself. Its self-alienation has reached such a degree that it can experience its own destruction as an aesthetic pleasure of the first order. This is the situation of politics which fascism is rendering aesthetic. Communism responds by politicizing art. Damn, he really hits hard right at the end with all that war stuff, but ain't it the truth?
Yeah, he ain't wrong.
An enforcement of unrealistic standards to make my property look consistently as it looks in pictures. Jacob, how's my life supposed to look like TV if there's homeless people on the streets, you know?
That's true. I guess
the
we should probably
trains
give
are
them less
supposed
rights.
to run on time. The paper is more real than real.